Hello, Stephen Bedard here. One of the most controversial topics facing the church is how to respond to the LGBTQ plus community, same-sex relationships, and related topics. And there's often a lot of argument, a lot of emotion, a lot of strong feeling on all sides. And there really is a need for some careful discussion, something that takes into account what the scriptures have to say, but also what we see God doing in the church and our understanding of some of these things in our modern day. All of those things have to be a part of the conversation. You might think that one or more of those might have more weight, but they do need to be conversation partners. As a Bible guy, I definitely am interested in looking at what the scriptures have to say about these things. And I don't intend to do a full biblical treatment on same-sex relationships in one video, but I'd like to at least make a start. I've been trying to work through these things myself, trying to understand what the scriptures have to say, trying to understand what it means to be a pastor, discipling Christians, helping people to grow in their relationship with Jesus, and all of these things have to be wrestled with. So I thought the first place that I would start is that of looking at the story of Sodom that is found in Genesis, because for many people, not all Christians start with this, but there are numerous Christians who would look at the story of Sodom from Genesis 19 and say, well, look, there is God's condemnation on homosexuality. And therefore, we need to take this very seriously. We do not want to be put in the place of Sodom. Just recently on social media, I saw pictures on Twitter of the White House that had rainbow lights on it, and people were comparing the White House that was celebrating Pride, comparing that to Sodom, and that they were in danger of judgment just as Sodom was in danger of judgment. So this narrative is something that is definitely floating around. So my question is, what actually was the sin of Sodom? Was it simply the fact that same-sex relationships were tolerated within Sodom, and therefore God responded with pretty severe judgment, and then used Sodom throughout the scriptures as a warning to us all? Is that really what is going on? So I'm going to read for you from Genesis 19 and the first 11 verses, just to situate us and try to get a good sense of what is going on. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he arose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. He said, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you can rise early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the square." But he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he made them a feast, and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, "Where are the men that came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, so that we may know them." Lot went out of the door to the men, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Look, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they replied, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came here as an alien. He would play the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Then they pressed hard against the man, Lot, and came near the door to break it down. But the men inside reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the door of the house, both small and great, so that they were unable to find the door. And you probably know how the story ends, that eventually Lot and his daughters and almost his wife escape, and fire and brimstone are poured out upon Sodom. And Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, and they've become a byword to this day. So what is going on here? Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge this is a very disturbing story on numerous levels. And I mean, for myself, to be honest, the thing that disturbs me most is Lot's attitude. The fact that he would be willing to substitute his own daughters to say, "Hey, I don't want you to rape these men, so here are my daughters. You can gang rape them," and that would be a much better thing than doing what you are intending. And we must be careful to not take that as saying that Lot was being wise here, that always the gang rape of women is better than the gang rape of men because it's not same sex. That if you look at how Lot is treated in Genesis, he's not usually lifted up as a great example of wisdom and discernment. He's usually described in a pretty negative way. So we need to be pretty careful here. So again, what is going on with this? Well, it's not a matter of there were some people in Sodom who noticed the men that Lot invited in and said, "Well, they're kind of attractive. I'd be interested in being in a relationship with them. I wonder if they are open to relationships." And then they initiated contact, trying to see if there would be some mutual interest in sexual activity. That's not really what we see happening here. They wanted to gang rape these men, and what exactly how that was understood, there's a number of things that we should look at. But as we're reflecting on it, we really do need to go to Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49 and 50, it's actually, we have a description of what the actual guilt of Sodom is. So when we're asking the question, what is the sin of Sodom? Why was it that God poured out his wrath upon Sodom? This is what is said. "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did abominable things before me. Therefore I removed them when I saw it." Now I find this very interesting that the emphasis here on the sin of Sodom, the first thing is mentioned is the prosperity they had and the lack of care for the poor. Now, when most people, especially conservative Christians, think of the sin of Sodom, they definitely do not think of the sin of Sodom as being a lack of care for the poor. In fact, I encounter numerous evangelicals who get nervous when we talk about care for the poor because it feels a little bit too much like socialism. It feels like a bit of a threat to capitalism. If the poor want to be taken care of, they need to just pull themselves up by the bootstraps and get a job and and do well that way. We don't want to be doing any kind of redistribution of wealth, because that would be too close to socialism. But that's a little bit close to what Ezekiel is saying here, is that the sin of Sodom was that they had a lot of money and there was a lot of poor, and they were not using the money that they had to help the poor. So that's an interesting thing. It does talk about they had committed abominations. It's not specified what that is. That's not to say that that does not include what we've just talked about, the threat of gang rape. I think that that's probably in there. I have heard some progressive Bible teachers who will say the sin of Sodom is simply lack of hospitality. That's it. That's all there was. There has nothing to do with sex. There's nothing to do with any of the stuff that we think of when we think of Sodom. It is simply lack of hospitality. And there's some truth to that, in that hospitality in the ancient world is far more important than what it is for us today. The idea that someone would be welcomed into someone's house, there's a level of protection that is provided for that. It's not just shelter from the elements, but there's more to it. There are a whole load of promises when a person is offered hospitality. And so for this person, when they demand of Lot to hand the angels over, the problem with it is not just that they would be forced to experience same-sex rape, but also the breaking of rules of hospitality. So that's a part of it. However, I would say to some of those progressive teachers that yes, technically, threat of gang rape is a lack of hospitality, but that does make it a bit more serious. So, again, what was the sin of Sodom? Well, we see that when we go to the New Testament, in Jude, it talks about sexual perversion and so on, and it sees sexual sin as being a part of it. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the focus was that God saw that there were same-sex relationships happening, and therefore drastic steps needed to take place. Just the threat of gang rape, and in that culture, gang rape of strangers who are welcomed into a home, that is considered a terrible perversion, terrible sexual sin in that way. And I would think that people on all sides of the debate, when it comes to same-sex relationships, would agree that the threat of gang rape is always wrong, whether it is same-sex or not. It doesn't matter. It is always wrong. And I think that Lot was wrong in offering his daughters as a substitute. So I don't think that if we're going to try to figure out what the Bible has to say about same-sex relationships, I don't think that Sodom is actually the best starting place for us. I don't think it gives us the clearest answers as to what was going on. But you might say, well, hold on a second. In the Bible, doesn't it refer to homosexuals, people who are active in same-sex activity, as sodomites? Don't they make that clear, that connection clear, that a person who's involved in a same-sex relationship or same-sex activity is a sodomite, so connected to that? Well, here's something that's probably helpful for you to know. If you look at the actual Hebrew, and the word in the King James Bible that we have as sodomite, if you look at the actual Hebrew, the word Sodom is nowhere in there. It doesn't actually refer to sodomites as well. That's the King James translators who are making that connection, because they saw the story of Sodom to be so closely connected with that of homosexuality. The Hebrew word for sodomite is actually kadesh, which is related to the Hebrew word for holiness, which is probably not what you expected. But it's referring most likely to male temple prostitutes. So they would be understood as a Kadesh because they are performing their duties, which would include same-sex activity, in what they would consider a holy place, in some kind of temple, in some kind of worship setting. And that's where that word comes from. So there's a lot of these things that are going along that really muddy the waters. Does that clarify exactly what the Bible has to say about same-sex relationships and same-sex activity? No, not really. But I think that it at least moves part of the discussion out of the way and makes some room for us to look at some other passages that might be more helpful in understanding what the Bible has to say about same-sex relationships. Thank you for watching this, and please visit my website at stephenjbedard.com. God bless.